Hello, today I'm going to be talking to you about identity theory. First, a few preliminaries, and then varieties of materialism and identity theory, a few objections, and we'll summarize as we tend to do. So, starting here, varieties of materialism. Recall that materialism is a thesis which entails all persons are purely physical objects, and a purely physical object is one such that if X is a physical object and all of its parts are physical objects, it will count as a purely physical object. Now, there are several ways to understand this thesis. That is to say, there are several flavors of materialism. Here is just one, not the one that we're going to focus mostly on, but one to give you an idea of how these theories look. Some maintain that every person is identical with a purely physical object. That is essentially the heart, that first claim A is the heart of materialism. This claim B is what makes this view an eliminative view. The claim is that nothing has mental properties. So if you'll recall, some examples of mental properties are like being happy or being in pain. An eliminative materialist will claim that these properties are illusions, since they can be explained away in terms of physical properties. So we're just mistaken, they say, in thinking that being happy is a mental property, is in fact just a physical property, and we are confused. This is an extreme position. As you can probably guess, it runs against a lot of our common sense, and we'll return to the plausibility of this view for later, but I just wanted to introduce it briefly here so we can give you, again, a flavor, or note that there are flavors of materialism, and here's an extreme version. We're going to be talking about a different one, different version of materialism today, the identity theory. This is a little more plausible, I think. So here's how it goes. This is the theory. Every person is identical with a purely physical object. That's the materialist claim. B, every person has both mental and physical properties. C, every mental property is identical, literally identical with some physical property. So a plausible candidate for a purely physical object referenced in that first claim is a person's body, though there might be some more nuanced way to spell this out, like it could be something like a part of your brain. Claim C, note, entails that being in pain is just for to be in pain is just for certain neural processes to occur in the person who is in pain. So, for instance, if you are experiencing pain, it's just some kind of C fiber firings in your brain, and it's not to say that you don't have the mental experience of being in pain, but that mental experience is at base, at heart, just these neural processes and nothing more. Now, why should we think this is true? Well, look, it is plausible that we're at least partly physical, and so saying persons or things like us are entirely physical is simpler than saying they're physical and immaterial, as we saw a dualist might hold. So there's simplicity in favor of this theory. Another reason to take identity theory seriously is that it does seem all organisms emerge from purely physical things, and as they evolve, some gained mental properties, like us. But it seems plausible with this sort of story that mental properties are just physical properties. They're identical with physical properties. Because to say, and the reason is because to say that they are not is to say that they are non-physical properties, and which is to say that in an evolutionary story, what is actually happening when something like us acquires over time mental properties is that physical properties are arranged in such a way that at some point, perhaps due to complexity, something non-physical emerges from them. So that seems like maybe it's not exactly in tension with evolutionary stories, but it does seem like something that needs to be explained if it is the case. Now, an identity theory explanation of organisms emerging from purely physical things and gaining mental properties over time is just that those mental properties are identical to physical properties. So this identity theory that we're considering here provides a straightforward explanation for the emergence of these mental properties through evolutionary forces. Now, there are also significant correlations between mental and physical phenomena that might suggest to you that they are in fact identical. A physical process in your eyes results in visual perceptions. Your stimulation in your ears from this lecture also generating some sensations of sound in your head somewhere, right? There's a strong correlation between mental and physical. It might lend credence to the view that they are in fact identical. And finally, mental events seem to cause physical events and vice versa. You lift your hand when you want to, and sometimes your mental realm is imposed upon by various external forces. Now, those are some reasons to think the identity theory is true. Now that we have it before us, let's consider some putative objections to it. Here's one. It was a softball. Argument from out-of-body experience. Premise 1. Some people have near-death experiences in which it seems to them that they leave their bodies. Premise 2. Some people have seemingly accurate beliefs about the distant past they do not acquire through research. The consequence of those is the conjunction. So line 4, if 1 and 2, then some people have immaterial souls. 5, if some people have immaterial souls, then the identity theory is false. Hence, identity theory is false. Is this a sound argument? What do you think? I mean, I sort of stacked the deck against it a moment ago by saying it was softball, but I think premise 4 is questionable. Let's work through objecting to it. I want to make clear for you how exactly you might object to this premise. So here I've spelled it out. So if you see again, I put if 1 and 2 there in the argument for in the interest of saving space, but here I've just added in 1 and 2. So if some people have near-death experiences in which it seems to them that they leave their bodies, and some people have seemingly accurate beliefs about the distant past they do not acquire through research, then some people have immaterial souls. That is the premise that we are going to pose an objection to. Now, how do we do that? Well, look, first we assume the underlying parts of the statement are true. That is to say, assume 1 and 2 are true. And then what we're going to do is, after assuming that, see if we can come up with a way for the part that comes after then, the consequent, to be false. So with that assumption in mind, let's see if we can pose a counterexample to the underlying portion. We might say, in pursuit of that, for example, that people near death are often suffering from a lack of oxygen to their brains, rather than having an immaterial soul, and that causes hallucinations, so they are in fact confused about leaving their bodies. Similarly, we might say beliefs about the distant past can be explained by imaginations which are mistakenly taken to be accurate. So this, again, this is not to undermine the truth of one. People do, in this case, seemingly have accurate beliefs about the distant past, and they didn't acquire them through research, they acquired them through imagining. Nevertheless, they are mistaken about the cause of that. Now, because we've assumed 1 and 2 are true, provided explanations for the phenomena without relying on immaterial souls, this premise is false. So, the argument is unsound. Remember, all it takes for an argument to be unsound is if one of the premises is false. Check this one out, a little bit better. Socrates' body was in an Athenian jail for a few months after he died. Premise 1. Premise 2. Socrates was not in an Athenian jail a few moments after he died. Tricky, tricky. Hence, 1 and 2. Now, if 1 and 2, then Socrates was not identical with his body. 5. Hence, Socrates was not identical with his body. And if that's true, then IT is false, hence IT is false. Is this a sound argument? Do you think this is a questionable premise? I bet you do. Well, check it out. Let me school you something. We can actually motivate this a little bit. It can be motivated by appealing to the following principle, which does seem true. If x is identical to y, then x and y have all the same properties. Think about that. If an apple is identical to an apple, and the first one's red, then the second one better be, right? As a consequence of this, in fact, it is entailed logically from the truth of the first that the following is also true. If x and y do not have all the same properties, then x is not identical to y. Think about that. You and I probably have different properties, for instance, whoever you are. I bet you're either not bald, or do not have blue eyes, or not have a beard, or something like that. I have all of those things. Baldness, male pattern baldness, blue eyes, a beard. It follows then that you and I are not identical, right? We have properties that are different. So, what does that mean? If we plug in Socrates and his body, the latter principle, we get if Socrates and Socrates' body do not have all the same properties, then Socrates is not identical to Socrates' body. That follows from just plugging and chugging into this principle, which, if we note at the top, we are calling Leibniz's law, after a very famous philosopher / mathematician named Gottfried Leibniz, who uncovered it. Now, since Socrates' body was located in an Athenian jail after he died, but Socrates was not, there seems to be at least one property not shared between them, namely being located in an Athenian jail. And that might make you think that premise 4 is true, because if 1 and 2, then Socrates was not identical to his body, right? Because the Socrates and his body didn't share properties in common at some point. I'll let you think about this one. Let's hop over to a different one. One you might have found in the reading. This is an argument from certainty. Again, this is an argument against identity theory. So, premise 1, Descartes is certain he exists. He sure is, if anything. 2, Descartes is not certain that any physical object exists. Also pretty certain, not certain about that. Now, hence 1 and 2. Now, if 1 and 2, Descartes is not identical with any physical object. And this, premise 4 here, is motivated by the same considerations we just saw in Leibniz's law when talking about Socrates and Socrates' body. Now, from line 5, hence Descartes is not identical with any physical object. And if that's true, then IT is false. Hence, IT is false. Check it to motivate. Descartes argued, if you remember from the reading, it's possible that there's an evil demon that constantly and persistently deceives him about the objects and properties in the world. He observes, however, that no matter what the demon does to deceive him, he cannot be deceived unless he exists. Dun, dun, dun. I think, therefore, I am. So Descartes can be certain that he exists, but he cannot be certain that he is not being deceived by some evil demon. If we assume these observations are true, then it seems Descartes has the property of being a thing whose existence Descartes is certain, while physical objects have the property of being things of whose existence Descartes cannot be certain. And by Leibniz's law, this entails Descartes is not identical to any physical object since they do not share all properties in common. What do you think? Is this argument sound? You might be wondering if it's not, where to push, right? What is the weak point in this argument if it's not sound? Is there a premise that you want to object to? Do you think Descartes is not certain that he exists? Do you think 1 is false? I don't. Do you think 2 is false? It's probably not. 2 seems pretty true as well, right? You're not certain that any physical object exists, are you? Not really, really certain. I mean, you're pretty sure, right? But like, not really sure. And 3 just follows from logic. 4 we just motivated with Leibniz's law. 5 is another logic. And of course 6 follows because if Descartes is not identical with any physical objects, then IT is false. So it seems like this argument is sound, right? Where are the false premises if it's not? Here, let me see if I can motivate thinking that something is amiss even if we can't identify what premise is problematic. So let's think of Joe. Joe is certain he exists, just like Descartes, and Joe is not certain that any astronaut exists. Hence 1 and 2. Now, if 1 and 2, then Joe is not identical with any astronaut. Hence, Joe is not identical with any astronaut. 4 motivated again by Leibniz's law, and 2 is motivated by this. So look, suppose Joe is an astronaut who has been to space several times, but who suffers from a head injury and develops amnesia. And when he sees a picture of himself as an astronaut, he doesn't recognize it. Over time, he grows, in fact, skeptical that there are such things as astronauts. He's starting to wonder if we've ever really been to space. So he is not certain that any astronaut exists. He is certain he exists, of course, but he's missing properties in common with astronauts. Joe is certain, skeptical, but he is an astronaut. The conclusion of this argument then seems wrong, because again, Joe is, in fact, according to the story, an astronaut. So what went wrong? It suggests something's wrong with Descartes' argument, even if it's unclear which premise to doubt. This is what we'll call an argument by parity. We have constructed a parity argument of Descartes, showing that if we run this argument, which is very structurally similar to Descartes, then we get an odd, incorrect answer or incorrect conclusion. And so something has to be going wrong in Descartes' argument, even if we couldn't exactly put our finger on what. Now let me summarize where we've gone. Now, identity theory is a theory that identifies the mental with the physical. It's a version of materialism, as we saw. And this version of materialism is motivated by common sense and compatibility with a scientific worldview. Objections, as we saw from out-of-body experiences, seem unconvincing, The objections that trade on Leibniz's law are potentially more convincing, though there are reasons to remain skeptical that identity theory has truly been undermined, because there are reasons to remain skeptical that these objections that trade on Leibniz's law are used to generate sound arguments against identity theory.